And so I wanted to briefly go over, I'm doing a series, an all-encompassing, comprehensive series on evidence for biblical creation. So make sure to check out episode 1. It is available for people to see. It's primarily a introductory episode to the series, but I am going to be covering everything, going to make sure it's as up to date as possible, best arguments available. So I did want to touch on carbon-14. Okay. So carbon-14 created in the upper atmosphere through cosmic ray bombardment, and C14 decays into nitrogen-14. We as humans, we eat plants, we eat animals. Plants and animals are taking in C14. So we're constantly having our C14 decay back into nitrogen-14, but we are consuming plants and animals that are also taking in C14 to build their bodies. Okay. So it's this process that's taking place. The problem is, though, when we die, when a creature dies, they no longer take in C14. So it just decays back into nitrogen. But the half-life on C14 decay is very short. It's about 5,700 years. Okay. What this means is we should not find any C14 in anything on this earth and in this earth that is supposedly millions to billions of years, because it should have all decayed away. And I would say about 100,000 years. We're being generous. But even if every atom in the whole earth were carbon-14, they would decay so quickly that no carbon-14 would be left on Earth after only 1 million years. So when we look at dinosaur bones, coal, diamonds, natural gas, so on and so forth, when we look to basically anything with carbon in it that's older than 1 million years, I mean, dinosaurs, they say, go back 65 million years, we shouldn't find any C14. Pretty basic, right? Well, notice this. Here's one example. Okay, this is a sea creature called an ammonite, was discovered in Redding, California, accompanied by fossilized wood. Both fossils are claimed by Strata, listen to this, guys, dating to be 112 to 120 million years old. So there shouldn't be any C14. And the scoffers, the critics, because they're so uninformed and unsophisticated, they'll say, oh, it's just trace amounts. No, it's a lot more than just trace amounts. Okay. Notice this, but yielded radiocarbon ages of only thousands of years. Why is there any C14 at all being found in a fossil, two fossils that are supposedly 120 million years? Okay. So we find C14 in coal, suggests ages of thousands of years, clearly contradict ages of millions of years. We find it in oil. We find it in fossil wood. Diamonds. Diamonds are the hardest substance on this earth. They're found deep within the earth. Therefore, they're shielded and guarded from cosmic ray bombardment. Therefore, the C14 in them will be intrinsic to the diamonds. We shouldn't find any, yet we do. We find a lot of C14 in diamonds that are supposed to be billions of years old. It should have all decayed away. Again, even if every atom in the whole earth were carbon-14, they would decay so quickly that no carbon-14 would be left on earth after only 1 million years. And yet we find carbon-14 in basically everything that has carbon in it: coal, oil, fossilized wood, diamonds. And your objections to this have been absolutely demolished. The critics are really failing at this piece. It's an irrefutable challenge that they're not adequately engaging. I'm looking at the chat. Let's see what the objections are, because we've engaged them all. Let's see what the best the critics have to offer. So here's a piece of evidence that is discriminatory. It is differentiating. It's not agnostic, because only one model, which is the young earth creation model, can account for this data. It's not agnostic where, well, both models can account for it. No. Notice this: geophysicist, well-qualified scientist, Dr. John Baumgartner, part of the Rate Research Group, investigated C14 in a number of diamonds. There should be no C14 at all if they really were over 1 billion years old. Yet the radiocarbon lab reported that there was over 10 times. So these guys, like for example, in my first episode, they said, one commenter said, oh, it's just trace amounts. They don't know. Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge, the 5 Ds of skeptic dodgeball. And so it's not just trace amounts. Again, over 10 times the detection limit. Thus, they had a radiocarbon age far less than 1 million years. Dr. Baumgartner repeated this. Notice this, with 6 more. This is not just like an anomaly where you got one example. No, he repeated this with 6 more alluvial diamonds, and these had even more radiocarbon. Guys, it's a great time to be a biblical creationist. If you're going to debate a deep time evolutionist, master this argument, they have no good response. The presence, so this means diamonds and C14 are a creationist's best friend. I'd like to write a handbook, a creationist's best friend, and we'll touch on everything C14 related. The presence of radiocarbon in these diamonds where there should be none is thus sparkling evidence for a young world, as the Bible cries. So notice this, guys. Here's their rescue devices. Let's leave no stone unturned. So the first cry is contaminate. Oh, it's all contamination. Well, firstly, these labs, they know what they're doing. They're sophisticated. They're smart people. They're very careful people. They subject these samples with very harsh acid treatments. Okay, notice this. Yet for 30 years, AMS radiocarbon laboratories have subjected all samples before they carbon-14 date them to repeated, notice this, repeated brutal treatments with strong acids and bleaches to rid them all of contamination. And when the instruments are tested with blank samples, they yield what? 0 radiocarbon. So there can't be any contamination or instrument problems. It's been dismantled. This one's funny. So they'll say, more informed critics will use this one. They'll say, well, nearby material, nuclear material, can recharge the C14 in diamonds. Well, the Rate team looked at that, and you would require thousands of more nuclear material. 13,000 times, I think it was, that they concluded to recharge the C14. In other words, unrealistic amounts of nuclear material. New radiocarbon. This is their cry. This is their rescue device. New radiocarbon was formed directly in the fossils when nearby decaying uranium bombarded traces of nitrogen in the buried fossils. Carbon-14 does form from such transformation of nitrogen, but actual calculations, notice this, demonstrate conclusively this process does not produce the levels of radiocarbon that world-class labs have found in fossils, coal, and diamonds. Okay, this is technical stuff. To break this down, let me use an analogy. Let's say you have a big carton of milk, okay, a gallon of milk, and you poke a big hole through it, a big hole. And so a lot of the milk is now gushing out. It's leaking out quickly. Well, it's not going to be long before there's no more milk left in that carton. That's akin or analogous to C14. C14 decays rapidly. Short half-life, shouldn't be any left anywhere in these samples that are supposedly millions or billions of years old, yet we find them, which means there hasn't been enough time for it to leak out because the Earth isn't millions to billions of years old. See, it's basic. So what's the most parsimonious answer? The simple answer is oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes the correct answer. Okay. Now they're saying nearby nuclear material can recharge the C14. Okay. That doesn't work. So let's say you have another milk carton, a gallon of milk. Take a little pin, hairpin or something, and just poke a tiny little hole in it. That is your leakage rate that is akin to your other dating methods. Okay. Your other radioisotope dating methods that decay slower. Potassium to argon, uranium to lead, so on and so forth. So, how are you going to fill up the milk carton that's just gushing out milk because you poked a huge hole into it with another milk carton that's just dripping out milk, one drop at a time? The rate is too small in comparison to the fast rate where you have your carton of milk that's just gushing out milk. If you try and replace that with a couple drops here and there, it's never going to counterbalance the leakage. Okay. So what you would actually need is about 100 different milk cartons, poke a tiny little hole with a pin, and then hopefully you can get enough milk that's leaking out of each of those milk cartons to refill the milk carton that's gushing out a ton. See how it doesn't work? It's a rescue device. It's weak. It's sad. It doesn't fit reality. And so that's been destroyed as well. Their best rescue mechanisms to answer this challenge of C14 in diamonds doesn't work. And those are their two main ones. Just to run through these real quick, we're going to be doing entire programs on each of these. More evidence for a young Earth. So the title of this program is now going to be Irrefutable and Undeniable Evidence for a Young Earth Creation. Dinosaur blood cells, blood vessels, proteins, hemoglobin, osteocalcin, collagen, histones, and DNA. They're all found in dinosaur fossils. How can this be the case if these dinosaurs are supposedly 65 million years old? This should have all decayed away. The DNA should have decayed away. The red blood cells should not be there, or vessels, the proteins. Living fossils, jellyfish, coelacanths, stromatolites, Wollemi pine. There's hundreds of living fossils. I did a whole series with Dr. Carl Werner. I recommend people check it out. Hundreds of species that remain unchanged over hundreds of millions of years, up to billions of years in the cases of stromatolites. So the millions to billions of years are therefore not real. They don't fit reality because the extreme stasis is contradictory to that idea. I talked about this one earlier. Flume tank research, these flume experiments that John Mackay and other young Earth creationist geologists have done. Also, secular scientists, you can look up experiments in stratification to see these layers forming rapidly. Flume tank research with sediment of different particle sizes show that layered rock strata that were thought to have formed over huge periods of time in lake beds actually formed very quickly. Even the precise layer thicknesses of rocks were duplicated after they were ground into their sedimentary particles and run through the flume. And so just picture a ton of different flumes going on, these flume experiments going on during the year-long flood. We have all these layers, you have limestone, all of these different things forming rapidly. Okay. And we've seen it in real time, like coal, oil, natural gas. Oil, for example, has been created quickly, rapidly in the lab. All you need is a lot of heat, pressure, and energy. And we know there would have been a lot of heat, pressure, and energy released during the flood. The pre-flood world was the perfect battery to rapidly form things like coal, oil, natural gas, and a lot of that heat that was used to form these things can be absorbed as well. Okay. The lunar recession, Kent talked about this one earlier. Tidal friction causes the moon to recede from the Earth at about 4 centimeters per year. It would have been greater in the past when the moon and Earth were closer together. The moon and Earth would have been in catastrophic proximity, the Roche limit, at less than a quarter of their supposed age. Kent talked about this in detail. Not a problem if the Earth is 6,000 years old. But if it's 4.5 billion years old, then yes, it is a huge problem. If the Earth is only 6,000 years old, there's no problem, because in that time, the moon would have only moved about 800 feet. It's trivial, 250 meters. But most astronomy books teach that the moon is over 4 billion years old, which poses a major dilemma. less than 1.5 billion years ago, the moon would have been touching the Earth. Another thing, too, about the magnetic field. Dr. Russ Humphreys, PhD, young Earth creationist. He's either an astronomer, cosmologist, or astrophysicist. Anyways, he's qualified. And he predicted if young Earth creation is true and magnetic fields decay so rapidly, some of the outer planets, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing his predictions here, so don't quote me too exact, but basically he predicted that if the universe is young, right, these outer planets would have evolved later, or would have evolved earlier, I should say, than the Earth. They evolve, and then billions of years later, millions of billions of years later, the Earth evolves. So therefore, the magnetic fields of those outer planets, like take Uranus, should have decayed away. They shouldn't have any magnetic fields. Prediction made, guess what? Years later, when they got the data to see if that prediction is true or false, it turns out those planets do have magnetic fields. The fact that they have magnetic fields means that they're not billions of years old, and that's a confirmed prediction made by a young Earth creationist scientist. It would be like me leaving my coffee here, okay? Nice, fresh, hot coffee, and I leave the house. Something came up, I leave the house. My wife didn't know I left the house. She was wondering when I left the house, why I left the house. If she came downstairs to my studio and she saw steam still coming from the coffee, or she took a sip and it's still hot, then an easy conclusion is that the coffee hasn't been sitting there that long. But if it's ice cold and the cream is curdled, then then obviously it's been sitting there for a long period of time. So the fact that these planets, a lot of these planets still have magnetic fields, some of them still have rings. Okay, there's other lines of evidence too we could point to in astronomy, tells us they haven't been there that long. That's the whole point. And okay, I think we'll wrap it up there. Another thing, though, I do want to recommend people check out our latest show with Dr. Jason Lisle, because when it comes to testable and falsifiable predictions, he made an amazing prediction before we got the data from the James Webb Space Telescope that your furthest galaxies would show evidence of maturity. Okay. Our galaxy is the Milky Way galaxy. It's mature. Okay. And the evolutionary model would say, according to the Big Bang Theory, mature, fully formed galaxies like the Milky Way galaxy would not have evolved or formed until later. Okay. But when we look out into the furthest reaches of space, what we find are mature galaxies, fully formed, functional galaxies. Dr. Jason Lisle made that prediction. When we got the James Webb Space Telescope, as far as you can look, you've got mature, fully formed galaxies. But the further you go back into the universe, closer to the Big Bang and the origin point, you should find primitive galaxies. They also shouldn't have the types of elements that we see in galaxies here closer to us, but yet you find them as well. You maybe find like a little bit of hydrogen, okay, maybe helium, and I recommend checking out that video with Dr. Jason Lisle. The point is, confirm predictions, mature galaxies as far as you can see and observe. Just truly incredible evidence for young Earth creation.